The purpose of our Lenten readings, especially in Year A, is to show us what it looks like to journey through faith. Our first week of Lent was the temptations of Jesus, showing us kind of these progressions through what it looks like to be tempted. Our third week of Lent was focused on the woman at the well. What does it look like for her to grow in faith with the Lord? What does it look like for the Lord to draw her deeper into faith despite her skepticism and sin? And today, we have the man born blind. Another beautifully, masterfully written episode from the life of Jesus from St. John. And in this case, it has a lot to teach us about how we grow in faith generally. The woman at the well, she grew in faith, again, through skepticism and despite sin. So that's more of what does it look like for Jesus to pull us out of personal sin or out of personal self-imposed exile or community ostracization. But here, this is something that applies to cradle Catholics, to converts. It applies to everybody because it's just the normal progression and deepening of faith in the normal course of a faith life. I would encourage us to think about this in a couple ways. I'm going to go through the progression that the man born blind goes through. But note, his faith grows from two sources. Source number one is persecution. He's pushed over and over again on his experience of God and on his faith. And it was through that persecution that his faith is deepened and that he has a deeper appreciation for Jesus. And then second, it's through reflection on his own experience. That persecution forces him to go back and say, do I believe what God did for me? Do I believe that this happened to me? And every time he reflects on it, he deepens his appreciation of and love for Jesus. So we begin with something that's really interesting. In most stories in the gospel where Jesus heals somebody, he asks first. He says, would you like to be healed? What do you want from me? What is it that you desire? Here, the disciples point at this guy and they're like, look at that blind guy. What happened to him? And Jesus is like, it's for the glory of God. Don't worry about it. And then instead of talking to the guy, Jesus spits on the ground, makes clay, and puts it on his eyes. And if somebody were going to do that to me, I would probably want to be asked first. That's kind of gross. But that's what Jesus does. St. John, everything here is deliberate. The reason this is presented this way is because in the life of faith, God always acts first. It is Pelagianism and a source of pride if we say, oh yes, I am faithful because of this, that, or the other thing that I've done. I sought God and found Him. I decided to enter into faith myself. But this is wrong. Everything is grace. Everything is the free gift of God. God is always seeking us long before we even realize that we're supposed to go to Him. God is always pulling us closer to Himself before we take even the first step. So here Jesus acts first. And what does He do? Well, it's weird, like the spit and the clay and whatever else. This is a callback to Genesis. Man is created out of the clay of the earth. And so what Jesus is doing, the blindness represents original sin. It represents the fallen nature of humanity. We're blind to the presence and grace of God. Jesus functionally recreates humanity in this moment. He's recreating this man anew. He's using clay, that image of the creation of man, to recreate this guy in a renewed life. To the point that when the community around this guy is confused about who he is this the same guy? Is this not the same guy? His answer is, I am. That's an answer that Jesus gives a lot in the Gospel of John. It's an allusion to the name of God in Exodus. I am who am. And in most Catholic Bibles that I've read, when Jesus answered that, it's always put in like small capitals. It's clear that it's like this declaration that stands alone. He's just saying, I am. He doesn't add any context. He's just saying that. And it's shown as a sign of he's confirming his divinity. In fact, in one of the Gospels, I think it's St. John, when he says, I am, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the soldiers who've come to arrest him collapse around him. Like they fall down and prostrate before the name of God. And so here, this is the only time in the Gospel of John where somebody else besides Jesus says, I am. Because he's just been recreated in divinity. He has been given the new identity that all of us receive in baptism. He is able to speak with the identity of a new man in Jesus. Now note, that comes about through persecution. This is the first act of persecution. It's by the community. So the community no longer knows him. And I would say for all of us, when we grow in faith, a lot of us, especially if we're converts, experience that. Our friends, our community might have known us as the person who overindulged in alcohol and used profanity all the time. Or, I'm the person who didn't care about anybody or anything. Or I'm the person who loved to sleep in on Sundays and I would never darken the door of a church. But then as we deepen faith, our life changes, our priorities change, we begin to act differently. And it's possible that many people around us no longer recognize us. They might say directly, oh yeah, you've changed. And maybe they like the new person, maybe they don't, but they don't know. They don't know if you're the same person. That's a form of persecution. Not malice necessarily. They don't realize what they're doing. But it's a form of us having to choose, am I going to lean into this religious identity of mine, or am I going to choose whatever my community expects of me? And it's in that choice that we deepen our faith in Jesus. The man born blind chooses to see, to follow the Lord. When we choose faith, that's going to deepen our faith. Every time there's a conflict and we choose faith, our faith is better and stronger. So the man begins to progress in his view of Jesus. So now he goes before the Pharisees. Again, persecution in this case by the civil and religious authorities. It is my ardent hope that I am not persecuting your faith. That's kind of the goal of the priest, is not to persecute your faith for being Catholic. But nonetheless, every now and again, we experience what we would call persecution at the hands of authorities, sometimes even religious authorities. But he's going before the leaders of his people, and they don't like his answers. They're very skeptical. What's going on? What's happening? There's a division amongst the leaders, even. Okay, this was done on the Sabbath. Is this a holy thing? Is this an unholy thing? What are we talking about here? But again, he has to defend himself before the wider society. And again, this form of defense and persecution forces him to make a choice. Am I going to defend what happened to me? Am I going to defend that it happened to me on the Sabbath? What am I going to say? The fact that he chooses Jesus deepens his faith. It's also another opportunity where he has to reflect on what did happen to me. How has God worked in my life? Deepens his faith. How do we know? At the end of that episode, when he's asked, well, what do you have to say about this guy? Because we can't make up our minds. He doesn't shy away from it, which we would often do when the wider society is telling us, make a statement about faith. Tell me about Jesus. Defend yourself. He doesn't shy away. He says, this man is a prophet. This man is a prophet. That's quite the statement. That's quite the statement before the Jewish leaders, where he knew at this point in Jesus' life, they were not very happy with Jesus. This was a dangerous thing to do. This man is a prophet. Or the leaders can't make up their mind. They bring in the parents, and the parents also know this is a dangerous thing to say, and they demur. They say, you know what? Why don't you ask him? It's funny because they say, well, we don't know how he can see, and we also don't know who opened his eyes. Well, they do know how he can see because he could have just woken up and seen, but they knew somebody opened his eyes. They've heard the story, but they don't want to say it. Say, why don't you just ask him? He's an adult. More persecution. This guy is persecuted now by his family. Again, not active persecution necessarily. He's not being killed. He's not being arrested. But they've decided they don't want anything to do with him in his faith. They don't want to, they're just like, this is your thing, and you can accept the consequences of that. So he's alienated. He's alienated from the wider society. He's alienated from the leaders of that society, forced to defend himself publicly. He's alienated now from his family, who says, again, they're not necessarily mad, but they're just like, this is not our thing. Why don't you go do your own thing? And yet at every moment, he chooses Jesus. And at every moment, he has to reflect more and more on what happened to him and how God has acted. And that reflection pushes him deeper into faith. To the point that when he's called before the Pharisees again, and he has to explain himself again, there's this sort of ironic moment where he cheekily says, "Oh, are you asking me because you want to become his disciple?" I don't know if he was blissfully ignorant. I don't know if he was truly that cheeky, but that is a sharp thing to say to the Pharisees when they've called you back in to question you again. But you can see the progression of faith. Not only is Jesus a prophet, but he's a prophet that I follow as a disciple. And I follow him to such an extent, I believe in him to such an extent, that now I'm going to invite those who are persecuting me to follow Jesus. I'm going to make that invitation. Again, every single one of us, it's the same thing. The more we have to choose Jesus above whatever else is going on in our life, above whoever else might be pushing us against faith, the more we have to choose Jesus, the stronger that choice becomes. The more we reflect on the story of Jesus, the more that story reveals his divinity. If I can look at the miracles Jesus has done in my life, the first time it's just a miracle. The second time it's the miracle of a prophet. And the third time it's the miracle of a prophet that I want to follow. And the fourth time it's the miracle of a prophet that I think is probably God. And that's where the man born blind goes. He's pushed. He asks if they want to become his disciple. He's kicked out of the synagogue. And then, I should also highlight, when he's pushed that second time, he talks about how unique Jesus is as a prophet, because they're all talking about, look, nobody has ever healed a man born blind. None of the prophets did that. And the fact that he's highlighting that shows not only is this a prophet, he's a prophet unique in the entire history of the world. There is no other prophet like him. So, he continues, he's kicked out, he's face to face with Jesus, and Jesus says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Now, this is a title Jesus was using as a messianic title his whole life, and the guy says, "Absolutely. Show me where it is." It's gone further and further. He's a miracle worker. He's a prophet. He's a unique prophet. He's a unique prophet that I am following as a disciple. He is the Messiah. And then when Jesus says, "You have seen him," and one of our parishioners last Mass pointed out that past tense. That's very interesting. I don't know why that's there. You have seen him. Has he seen him in his reflections on this miracle? Has he seen him in the eye of his heart? Is it just a Hebraism where you have seen him as though you're looking at him right now? But nonetheless, interesting phrasing. You have seen him. And then the guy goes from, yes, I do believe in the Son of Man, I do believe in the Messiah, show me where he is. Now the guy falls down in worship. So he goes from miracle worker to prophet to unique prophet that I'm following to Messiah to God. You only worship God. It only comes about from persecution, from a deepening of faith, from a reflection on what has gone on in my life. And I would say, every single one of you has that. Every single one of you. Sometimes the persecution is external, really being alienated for living an ardent and visible and public faith. Sometimes that persecution it's external, but it's also internal. It's the temptations. The temptations from the devil, which is external, the temptations from ourselves, which is internal. But facing those temptations and saying, I choose Jesus rather than the sin, that's a form of persecution that deepens your faith, because the more you choose Jesus, the stronger your choice becomes. And sometimes that persecution is voluntary. That's what Lent is often all about. I'm giving something up. I'm making a sacrifice. I'm struggling for my faith so that I can choose Jesus above whatever this thing I've given up is. By doing that, you are strengthening your faith because you're choosing Jesus more and more. I'd also say every single one of us has some kind of experience of the Lord. And I would encourage us, reflect on that experience regularly. The more you reflect on that experience, the more you're going to appreciate who Jesus was in that experience. The more you're going to see the divinity and the power and the glory and the mercy of God. Regularly review in thanksgiving what God has done for you and see how that opens up and broadens your faith. My friends, the story of the man born blind is not the story of the man born blind. It is the story of humanity. It is the story of each of us, recreated in Christ by the pure grace of God, not by any merit of ours, but because Jesus reached out to us first. And it is the story of how all of our faith deepens after that first movement of God, after receiving baptism. How all of us are brought into a deeper appreciation for the mystery. Lean into the persecutions. Choose Jesus in every moment. Lean into the miracles and the experiences. Give God thanks for what you have seen in your life. And then, like the man born blind, watch your faith grow and flourish and flower.